Hello there, this is Rob Chadwick with ADL. This is the 8th in a series of tutorials on building online 3D content with the Virtual World Framework Sandbox application. In our previous tutorial, we looked at geometry modifications, and prior to that, we looked at primitive objects. So you now know how to create cones and spheres and boxes and planes, and you know how to layer together several different transformations on top of those. Today, I'm going to give you a little bit of eye candy. We're going to create something kind of fun out of these tools. And you'll get to see a couple of different features that I didn't mention in the geometry modifiers lesson, and we'll actually create something useful. I'm going to go ahead and delete some of these objects. I'm just clicking on them and hitting delete, but I'm going to keep the plane. Now, if you want to create a new plane, that maybe you don't have one already, it's the button right here. And remember, just like all of the objects that get created, it'll appear right at the center of your view where it intersects with the world. So click, and a plane appears right at the center of my view. I'm going to go ahead and use the one I had, although it doesn't really make much of a difference. Open the object properties, just like we had before. I'm going to open the plane tab, and I'm going to turn the length and the width up. Now, we're going to make this even bigger later by using the transform type in, but for now, let's keep that, and let's turn the length segments and the height segments all the way up. I guess it's length and width segments, whatever. Now, you can't see any difference here now, but you'll note from the previous example, you saw how much of a change the number of segments could have in the shape of the object when you put the modification on there. And I'll show you exactly why that is here in a moment. If you just saw a little bit of objects kind of flickering here, it's because the plane was precisely and mathematically on top of the grid here. I'm just going to move it up in space a tiny bit so it doesn't do that. So, to create this demo, and by the way, if you haven't guessed, I'm going to make a terrain. I want to put a noise modification on top of this plane object. So it's 50 by 50. Note that 50 by 50 is a lot of vertices. So for some people's computers, these transformations could be slow. We've put some effort into making the noise modification pretty fast using an algorithm called Simplex Noise. But, you know, depending on exactly how fast your computer is, 50 by 50 might be a lot. There is kind of a limit coded in here at 50 by 50, but if anybody is interested in having higher resolution values, then contact me and I'll talk to you about how to disable those limits. I'm going to create modifiers, Simplex Noise. Don't bother with the Perlin noise. This is something older we were doing. It's much slower, and the results are basically the same. So Simplex is superior. We just keep Perlin for backwards compatibility. This will create a new modifier, Simplex Noise 1. I'm going to open that, and you'll see that as modifiers go, this one is one of the more complicated. It's got a lot of different values. Let's start by turning up the amount. Now, if this object just disappears, don't worry too much about it. Oh, of course, I've got to hit Effect Z. Because I want this to be a terrain that's kind of what we call a height map terrain, I'm just going to affect only the Z axis. Now, you'll see our object almost looks like it's disappeared, but there's actually a chunk of it down here. It's just dropped below the plane. I'm going to pull it up a little bit so we can see the results, and hey, look at that. That's interesting. It's this kind of crazy shape. If it's kind of hard to see, it's because by default, this modifier doesn't update the normals, so the lighting looks kind of strange. I'll click that, and now the lighting looks proper. It's kind of a subtle effect with the sun shining straight down, but I don't want to talk about changing the sun direction right now, so we'll just have to leave it as it is. So, we now have a 50 by 50 grid with this kind of bizarre shape on it. Let's look at all the different properties here. The noise amount is how much deformation this random deformation has. X, Y, and Z are kind of crazy. If I check, let's just check the Y. If I check the Y, you'll see it actually has some noise-ness on the Y-axis as well. And look how it creates these big gullies. That's probably not best for what we're doing for this demo, but you can create some interesting shapes with that. Iterations will make more little bits of noise on top of the noise. This is actually something I'm going to use later to make the noise rougher, is a good way to explain how this works. Smooth and rougher and rougher. The scale is how big each bump is. Let me turn the iterations down so you can really see this changing. If I turn the scale way down, you'll see it's this big, smooth swoop. As the scale goes higher, it's lots and lots of dense little peaks. What I'm going to do to make an interesting terrain is keep the scale somewhere in the middle here. And I'm going to maybe click the random C just to get randomly different shapes. You know what, that's fine. And then I'll use the iterations to kind of roughen up the object that was there. So 5 iterations is probably plenty. And I'm going to turn down the noise amount because this isn't really a terrain that we could walk on. Here we go. This looks good. This is kind of a crazy terrain. Another interesting thing you can do is roll the phase. The phase just slides this around in space. I don't want to talk about the material editor yet because I'm going to save that for my next lesson, and maybe we'll use this terrain. But I do want to show you how all of these objects, even this terrain, are actually collidable. The character can walk on them. I'm just going to click and grab my character and place him in this little low point. Let me focus my camera on him and watch how he works. Let me deselect him. If I turn him around and I walk, you'll see that this crazy terrain actually works as a collision shape. The character will always stay clamped on top of any object. Anything the graphics, the character actually uses the graphic system for what we call a raycast. So anything that you see on the screen is something he can walk on correctly. So there you have it. Here's kind of a crazy terrain shape. And I did say we would make it bigger, so let's make a huge terrain. You'll note that the size is all the way up, but we can use the transforms tool to really make our terrain much, much, much bigger. Let's go. 9 by 9. So here is this huge terrain off in the world. And if we like, let's, I'm going to walk, well, he's just going to fall onto the ground anyway. We turn up the noise amount. And then we can even turn up the scale down. Oh, no, wrong way. There we go. And now we have some kind of crazy terrain that the character can walk on.